Welcome to the Haven Collective. I'm J.R. Forasteros, and this is the Beacon Bit. Today we're talking about John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. This is Jesus' teaching about himself as the true shepherd. As we're starting, I want to ask this question that I know in our Beacons we've asked a lot, and I think I hear it from a lot of folks these days, which is how do we know what authentic Christianity looks like? How do we know if we're being truly faithful to Jesus? And I think that's tricky for a couple of reasons. One, because of the rise of Christian nationalism, because we have so many people these days that are claiming a faith that looks so diametrically opposed to what the rest of us think faith should look like. And so it's not like, you've always heard these stories about churches splitting over the color of the carpet in the sanctuary or something like that, right? It's not like these like little minute differences that don't seem to matter to anyone else. It's literally things like, does Jesus endorse deporting people, right? Does Jesus endorse totalitarianism or not? And there are these sharp, big, deep divides between us where it seems like one of us has to be right and one of us has to be wrong. It doesn't seem like this is the kind of thing that we can just sort of agree to disagree on. But then how do we know that we're on the right side? I mean, of course we think we're on the right side, right? Otherwise we'd probably be on the other side. But how do we know that we're truly following Jesus? I think this is a question that is difficult in part because the answers that Jesus gives us are not particularly satisfactory necessarily. But I'm going to show you what he says, and then we're going to dive into that in our beacons this week. So in this particular chapter, Jesus describes us, his followers, as his sheep. And he talks about this presence that is a thief who is coming to steal the sheep. And these are the people in the larger context of the story that are the other religious leaders that Jesus is confronted by in his day. Pharisees, Sadducees, people like this who are teaching a way of knowing God that is contrary to what Jesus is teaching. And so he says that because he is the true shepherd, when his sheep hear his voice, we will follow him and we will not listen to the thief. Now, I've never been a sheep herder. I guess that's a shepherd, right? But I have been told by a number of different shepherds that this is a true thing about sheep. They actually learn the voice of their shepherd, and then they will only respond to that person. So I could go stand next to the shepherd in the field and be like, come on, sheep, 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 sheep. And they would completely ignore me. But as soon as the shepherd called them, they would immediately come running. And this is what Jesus says, that if we know his voice, then we will not be confused or distracted by people who are offering an alternative teaching, an alternative way. So how do we know what Jesus' voice sounds like? This is the $1 million question, right? It's frankly one as a pastor I get all the time. How do we know when Jesus is talking to us or when we're hearing someone else's voice claiming to speak for Jesus or when we're just hearing our own voice? Well, it's something that we have to learn. Much in the same way that a sheep has to learn the voice of the shepherd, right? You just don't immediately, buy a sheep or meet a lamb or whatever, and it doesn't form like an instant bond. You don't pair it like you do a cell phone, right? They have to learn. And our process for that is what we call spiritual practices. Here at Haven, there are 5 that we really endorse. We love fasting and feasting, that twin practice there. We love keeping Sabbath. We talk about giving as a spiritual practice. We talk about reading scripture, meditating with scripture, and then prayer. Those 5 are ways that we have found particularly helpful for leaning into learning to hear Jesus's voice. Practices, right? They're spiritual practices. They're things that we do on a regular, repeated basis that help us recognize who Jesus is and how he's speaking to us. They help us discern the work of the Spirit in our lives. So what I really want to do today in our beacons is dive into how we explore spiritual practices, the ones that we're really comfortable with, the ones that we find confusing, maybe some that you find really helpful that are not some of the core 5 that Haven emphasizes, and then what we can do to hear Jesus's voice more clearly, because I think now, at least more than any other time in my lifetime, it's really, really important that we can articulate clearly who Jesus is and what he's inviting us to do. I look forward to this conversation in our beacons this week. Until then, grace and peace go with you.